So thank you very much for coming. I was expecting to have about 5 people following the keynote, so glad I didn't offend too many people. Fantastic. We're going to jump in today on specific strategies for supporting school success. I'm going to do just a little bit of framing of context to reiterate some of the pieces that we talked about just an hour ago. And I want to focus on how you can use these strategies at Tier 1 or at Tier 2 or as elements of Tier 3 packages for students. So as we just chatted about, CI3T is a tiered system. And it is different than MTSS, and then it's broadened to also address social and emotional well-being at the base. So when we think about Tier 1 happenings, it's going to be that entire deal. One of the reasons why we have this is we want to create some transparencies about what is available for every single student, what is available for some, and what is available for a few. And importantly, we wanted to, years and years ago, and as I mentioned, this started in the late 90s with Holly Menzies, who literally just retired last week from Cal State Los Angeles. She's a wonderful human being and a really close friend. And then Wendy Oakes has been a major contributor for the last 10 years. She's done all the work with me in Pennsylvania, so she's probably a familiar face and a familiar name to some of you. But through the years, we were all classroom teachers, and we all supported professional learning through either as roles of instructional coaches or behavior specialists. And one of our goals in creating CI3T was to create some simplicities and clarities, because the business of teaching is complicated. How many of you have changed jobs as a classroom teacher, either gone to a new grade level or gone to a new school, right? Hey, Di. So as you're having that transition, even though you're so good at your job at what you do, when you go new places, often it's like this, big building of wonderful happenings, we just don't know what they are, because it's different in different buildings within a school district. So when we think about our charge that we are asking general ed teachers to partner with special education teachers and all the other wonderful people at a school to create these very positive, productive, and efficient environments for students, we need to make sure that we're investing in our teachers. And part of the reason for the particular blueprints that we're talking about today is to be clear on what is expected, like what are the roles and responsibilities for students, but also for faculty and staff. So in other words, like let's say I got hired tomorrow at a school here in Pennsylvania. Ideally, if they were a CI3T school, they could hand me the blueprint to say, this is how we do business at our school. Many of the systems we work with, they actually use this in the hiring process. So that when they're coming to interview, like if you're a paraprofessional coming in to apply for a job, if you are a gen ed teacher, if you're a principal, people can see this is the current blueprint for your school. Some of the districts we work with, even as they bring in a new principal leader, they teach them the framework, they let them put their own stamp on it in terms of their uniqueness, but it's creating commonalities. And it's also important for families, because as parents, we often have one kid in an elementary, another kid in a middle, and maybe another kid at a high school. And so we want to make sure that families can know what to expect for every kid and what's available for Tier 2 and Tier 3. Today, we're going to focus mostly on these strategies as they fit in Tier 1, and we're going to thread those through to Tier 2 supports today. But as we think about these roles and responsibilities for faculty and staff, the CI3T blueprint is like the constitution for their school. And it's saying, here's the big ideas, and then every year, based on the feedback from faculty and staff on social validity, like what they think about the goals, the procedures, and the outcomes, and what implementation looks like, there are amendments made to it. So as you're learning new things, and ideally as the scientific community is learning new things, we want to bring those into our building, and we want to push out things that no longer have enough evidence to suggest that they work. Because there's some things that we have done for years for history. Do you see this lipstick I'm wearing right now? CoverGirl 542. I have worn this for 27 years. I've worn it since the first day I kissed my husband. I probably think that all the good luck is tied up, and I know but everybody's like, bad color, makes your teeth look more yellow. Don't look at my teeth, I know they're hideous. But I do this out of history, out of repetition. This may not be the best color. I personally really need to keep going with this color because we've been married for 25 years, and I'm seriously thinking it's potentially partially due as a contributing factor. There's probably no science to suggest that. I think my husband probably would still love me if I could switch to CoverGirl 547, something, I don't know. I say this to you, though, because we're going to have an honest conversation today about what we're doing at Tier 1 that may need to be revisited. It might be the new lipstick color that you're looking for. And we're going to do the same thing at Tier 2. Sometimes we have designed the most well-intentioned things at Tier 2, and frankly, sometimes I think we may have missed some of the valuable information from applied behavior analysis, things that we can just do as simple shifts in intensity at Tier 2. So like these strategies, some of which we're going to talk about today, I'm going to do those as Tier 1, but is your name Marissa? That's great. My son is dating a lovely woman named Marissa. I think that they're probably she's going to be it, and I love her. She's fantastic. So love you already too. Okay. Oh my gosh, and somebody save this video, because if they do get married, I want to put this clip into their wedding montage. Okay, you. Okay. You can all be a part of it with me. Fantastic. They'll be thrilled, I'm sure. Anyway, this is like my brain right here. There was going to be something I was going to say, and it was about Marissa. So Marissa, let's say I am doing instructional choices for the whole class. I might do those with greater intensity for her to pull in her engagement and maybe minimize her disruption. Similarly, I might do behavior-specific praise as part of my Tier 1 efforts, but behavior-specific praise can be a targeted support for kids where I drive deeper and maybe give a higher rate of reinforcement for that particular student. I asked somebody for cough drops before the keynote, just in case I needed them, and I took 3, and she handed me 1 more and said, here, take this 4th one, because they're good ratios 4 to 1. Love it. So we want to use data to make decisions about how we're going to drive on this. But as we're thinking about these strategies, the point that I want to make is we're going to do these in context of Tier 1. And to do these, we really do need to have these other things around them. Like we need to know what our expectations are. We need to know what the routines and procedures are in our classroom. So these are not a one-size-fits-all fix everything, but they're going to be part of your system. And these are going to be one of the things that we teach every adult at Tier 1. And we need to make sure that remembering to acknowledge the adults for using these new strategies, just like we acknowledge kids for meeting new expectations. We are asking people to get a little uncomfortable. I'm going to butcher the details of this, but you probably have heard of that wonderful quote by Eleanor Roosevelt, like, do what terrifies you. And when we think about trying new strategies, some people are very hesitant. And I've had people tell me, like, I'm afraid to start praising kids in my class at a higher rate because they're going to think I'm weak. And if that's a concern, we need to take that adult wherever they are and move them forward. Some people are afraid. We're going to talk about instructional choices, and some people are really nervous about starting off by building in choice. And the choice isn't like, hey, do you feel like working today? We know the answer to that. Instead, it might be, do you want to do this activity by yourself or with a shoulder partner? Or would you like to do the evens or the odds? So we're going to build in choice and talk about the how and the why. But we are asking people to get outside of a little bit of what's comfortable for them. So we want to make sure that we're inviting them to do things with sufficient research behind them. We want to acknowledge them, and then we absolutely want to make sure if it's working. At the end of the keynote, we talked about Tier 2 and Tier 3, and we are going to thread these through these 3 strategies that we're going to focus on today to show you how to do it at Tier 1 and how to do it at Tier 2. But I want to say these aren't the only Tier 2 supports that you're going to need. So these are going to be things that we're going to do with greater intensity, and I heard a really good conversation in the big room with some people talking about that they have made separate lists, like here's academic, behavior, and social and emotional. And I want to invite us to revisit putting that all together, because I'm going to need to weave those together. If I've got a kid that has Tier 2 or Tier 3 needs for behavior, so my screening data to suggest that they need more than Tier 1 has to offer, and I've got them in a reading group, I'm going to need a behavioral support to help them stay engaged in that particular intervention. So that child might be to participate in that Tier 2 reading group. They might need a self-monitoring intervention to help them stay engaged at that table. If I have another student, like let's say Diana, maybe she's like really anxious about participating. I might do a behavioral support for her before she heads into that group. And it just might be as simple as increasing her opportunities to respond in a kind of a protected way. So I might hand Di 6 paper clips, and I might tell her, hey, before we head to our small group today, I'm going to be looking for you to participate 6 times, but I promise to never call on you. So every time you participate, just move a paper clip to your other pocket, And when you're all done, you're all done. And if you want to contribute more, awesome, but you don't have to. So I just removed the anxiety of being called on, because for some kids, that's all they can think about. Instead of being in the reading group, she might be thinking, oh my gosh, if I get this answer wrong, I'm going to be embarrassed. If I'm embarrassed, they're going to tease me. If they tease me, I'm not going to want to come to school. If I don't come to school, I'm not going to graduate. If I don't graduate, I'm going to be homeless. And if I'm homeless and it gets cold in the winter, and then where am I going to go? And it's warm in the summertime because it's really hot and I don't know where I'm going to shower. So all of a sudden, she's showering in a fountain instead of just being in the reading group. So if we can weave those together, we can address those. And it's not like, here, let me give you this personality transplant and then put you in reading. It's just simple supports. So let's keep in mind that what we're talking about today also may be active ingredients in a tier 3 support. And you don't need a ton of tier 2 and tier 3 interventions. You need ones that work. You need those with sufficient evidence. And we have to get enough in our building and sufficient professional learning on how to use them to make them worth your investment. It would be better to do fewer things well. And you've heard George Sugai and Rob Horner talk for years about working smarter, not hard. They would be proud of you, and I am too. That's right. So we want to move forward in a calm and efficient way. So thinking about this issue of transparent access. So we're talking today about 3 specific tools, low-intensity strategies, but we want to be clear these fit as part of a system. So we're encouraging you to do that. And I'm inviting you to continue exploring CI3T as we focus on this teacher level support. But this is where we're going to live today. So that's where we're going to be in this context. And you can think about, some of you have probably been to wonderful universities and you've had fantastic classes on how to engage students and provide accessible instruction. So critical. At the end of the keynote, when we were talking about the CrossFit example, when we think about, solid supports, it's giving kids the rubber band. It's giving them the box to lay on. It's giving them the ab mat. It's giving them the prompt to say, hey, Kathleen, use the bathroom before we jump rope this time. It's all those things that we just want to weave into our instruction, not going to be a big deal. And it's not like you're saying, anybody with a learning or behavior problem, line up the door, I'm going to give you a pre-correct. We're just going to weave these things in a really respectful way. So one of the things that we've learned through the years is that we used to just stand up and say, and when I say we, I'm talking about the people with all the little heads that were on that first or second slide of all the people on our team. We used to go and just say, weave in these things to your instruction. Weave in higher rates of praise, build in instructional choices, increase kids' opportunities to respond. And there was a woman who came back and at the end of and I wish I had written down her name. I was presenting in Kansas and this lady came up after this session. She's like, I really enjoyed this. She's like, but if we knew how to do those exact things you're saying, we would already be doing them. She's like, if you really want to do something good in your life, she's like, tell us how to do those. And then she left. I'm like, goodbye. And so we did. So we wrote this book. And I wish I could have remembered her name because I would have dedicated to her because she is exactly right. So this book, and I'm not suggesting you need to buy this or anything, but some people will do this as a book study. And there is one chapter that kind of explains why do you work in a tiered system and how do these apply. And then, to this lady's credit, there is a chapter on how to do each one of those things. And so it's a what is it? What is the research behind it? And some people truly do care about the research behind it, like where does it work and how. And some people don't really care, but they just want to know that it's out there. They don't want to read it. So it's summarized in a way that it's accessible. And then it is literally a step-by-step thing on how to do them. And the steps we're going to talk about today exactly align with this. And then we've made some professional learning materials for you to use to support these implementation. So there's literally a chapter on each one of those things. So I'm going to invite you just to don't feel like you have to take a billion notes, and I want you to feel stressed at all today. So you've got web-based resources. These things are written down and out loud, like readable words there. And then we also had a special issue just come out in a journal called Beyond Behavior. And it was written in partnership with practitioners who have used all these strategies. So if you want to see another way to access it, if you belong to a university, you should just be able to download those articles for free. So right now, if you are not yet already, feel free to jump in to that professional learning tab, and I want to orient you as to where you are. So if you're logged in on the main page, you can click on that tab that says professional learning, because I want to reassure people you don't need anything emailed to you after this. It's all right here for you. So you can find things like, if you wanted to learn more about check-in, check-out, high probability request sequence, which is not one we're going to do today, but I want you to know those resources are there. increased opportunities to respond, we are going to talk through today. And we are also going to start with instructional choices. So I would like you, if you would, to just take a peek. And again, ci3t.org, professional learning tab. And there are other places you can access similar resources. You can go to the IRIS modules at the Vanderbilt site. You can jump on pbs.org, which is the website for the National Center on Positive Behavior Intervention and Support. There's wonderful resources, so this isn't the only place. But what I'd like you to pay attention to as we have just this first little moment of exploration is that anything you do for a student that is extra. Do you remember how we talked about at Tier 1, we need to assess social validity to find out what people think about the goals, the procedures, and the outcomes? Because we're going to use that to drive professional learning. We're going to do the same thing at Tier 2. Because if a kid tells you straight up front, like remember the 1-800 number for wrinkle cream, if they're telling you straight up that I am not doing that self-monitoring intervention, it would be embarrassing for me to have that taped to my desk. Listen to them. We can get at it in a more private way, but if they're telling you up front it's too difficult, they're not going to do it. We had this really nice, so I told you all the places we moved. We had this lovely home in Tennessee, and part of the reason we bought it was because it was near the YMCA, and I, at that point, was really trying to I wanted to get into exercise. It had like a walking trail literally from our door to that YMCA, and I swear to God, I drove by that place like twice a day thinking, yeah, I could totally do that. I could stop this car, I could go home, I could walk there. I hadn't built a plan that facilitated it, so my goal was there, but my procedures were not yet in place. Super different than my daughter. She is, as I told you, just wonderful. Last night, she saved up her money and bought a rig for our garage. So last night, she and my husband put it all together. So she's sending me pictures of her new Bella bars and her weights, and I admire so much about that. And all I was thinking about was should I or should I not have the second glass of red wine last night? I didn't. I had one. It was 30 carbs. I entered it in my little clock watching macro monitoring thing, which is fantastic. So social validity we're going to talk about, and we want to listen to our kids because we don't want to alienate the people we're trying to support. And when we're teaching teachers how to do these strategies, same deal. We're not going to walk into somebody's classroom and say, girlfriend, you are a hot mess. Sit down, let me show you how to do choices. We're going to weave it into instruction, take them where they are. And then anytime we do a Tier 2 support, we do need to know if it's happening. And because sometimes, go back to the idea of small groups. If we're not collecting attendance information of participation, you can't accurately interpret their oral reading fluency scores. They may not be responding because they're not participating, or they might be there but not participating. So you have to have some kind of fidelity data. So we're going to take a peek at those things, but right now, my goal for you today is to get some exposure to these 3 strategies. We're going to work through these steps together, but I want to build familiarity with the resources themselves. So if you would, please, we're going to take the full 10 minutes right now for you to download things that are interesting to you. And I'd like you to please start by just looking over what's an instructional choice. And that one's been developed in part from some additional resources from the Institute of Education Sciences as part of a mentorship grant awarded to Robin Ennis. So let's see what we can find. It's fun to watch what you have found on the site. I saw some people downloaded the IRP 15, which is the Intervention Rating Profile 15. We had a good conversation about what do you do if the teacher scores, because you're going to assess that from teacher and student perspective before you start. And if the teacher's scores are a little bit low, we're going to use that as a conversation point with them to find out if they don't think it's fair, that a kid get this extra support or higher rates of reinforcement, then we need to do some equity work with the teacher. We need to go back to those explanations of fair is not always equal. And I'm committed to giving you what you need, even though it might be different than what Nathan needs or what Katie needs. So we want to make sure that we're prepared to respond to that. Some of you found under the instructional choice one that there's even data collection systems there for you. So you can do direct observations of engagement. There's, how many of you found the check for understanding? Okay. We don't call that a quiz because some of the earlier feedback is people felt anxious about that. I would encourage you not to use the acronym because I didn't think that through. CFU. So, but the intent was to have a way to truly check to see if they understood the how and the why of the intervention. So just so you know, that's the spirit of it. It's not Big Brother watching, but you want to know, as somebody who's getting ready to start that in your classroom, are you clear on what to do? If it's you coaching somebody else to start in their classroom, are you needing to give some more support to make sure that they're ready to go? So what we're going to do now is I'm going to walk you through 3 different strategies. And these are the exact downloads from the professional learning page. And I'm going to show you these as is, because they're intended to be packaged. And I know different districts have done this in different ways. I had an opportunity to work with some of the BOCES in the New York area, and this is how they would bring people in. They would train them how to do it. They would go out and use these resources. One thing I've learned through the years, and you've probably seen that, is that people are working really, really hard in their buildings, making up all their own stuff. So like there might be 8 different self-monitoring interventions and different protocols for consistency of experience, for efficiency in professional learning, to be able to take one student and have them get this support from this teacher, another teacher see what that support looked like. It's important for all types of communication. So these front matter pieces, if you were doing these, we've had people do these as a 1-hour professional learning for faculty and staff. We've had people do a strategy a month. There's a wonderful leader in St. Louis, and he has assembled his cabinet. He's the superintendent. They do 2 strategies a year, and it's an expectation that the entire set of people employed in the district that work with kids learn how to do that strategy. And they drive deep on that solid professional learning. We've had people that are going to, like working in their building and things, and they've done these things like genius bars, where you can drop in, just ask a little bit about a strategy. We've seen people do Ignite sessions, where they take just a couple clips of these and then do 3 or 4 10-minute excerpts on these strategies, and then people pick one to go through as a breakout to go learn more. I was at a district-wide PD day, and they had these literally in the hallways in the main transition areas. They had these screens set up, 5 chairs, and so they gave people a 15-minute passing period so that you could talk, see your friends, and dip a toe into a 5-minute introduction into what is behavior-specific praise and why. So as we're thinking today, I want you just to know these resources are there exactly as you're going to see them right now, and you can use these in any way that you see fit. Every strategy is going to follow the same overview. We want to explain why people are working in a system, so that, because we don't want people to think this one thing is the silver bullet. It's ideally part of a bigger system. But we want people to know what that strategy is, why it's effective, what the supporting research says, the benefits and the challenge, and then this implementation checklist so that they can go get it started in their building, and then knowing how it's working. So keeping in mind that that's the rhythm of how these will pace out. Again, you would begin your base and acknowledge that some kids are going to need more than Tier 1 has to offer, and that is okay. It doesn't mean that the teacher's not doing a good job. It means that that child might need a little extra support. And I would refer to everything that we're talking about as low-intensity strategies. And I would call them low-intensity, teacher-delivered strategies. And personally, I think these are a really good idea to embrace these, because it is a lot easier to make one small shift in how I'm teaching than it would be to coordinate putting kids into all these different Tier 2 and Tier 3 supports. And if I can get the engagement and minimize the disruption with this one change in my teaching, that's a much more efficient move on my part. So let's start by talking about what instructional choice is. It simply means that kids are going to be given 2 or more opportunities, and this is important, that the kid is allowed to independently select the option, and that they're given their choice. Instructional choice is not what does the group want to do, and then the group makes a decision, because it might be that what I wanted didn't get picked by the group. So the strategy we're talking about might be that I give everybody a choice on, you can take notes on your computer, on your phone, or you can do handwritten notes, but I'm going to put out options, bless you, and you have to be comfortable with the options are being laid out. We don't want to say, oh God, do you really want to pick that one? I think that's a terrible idea for you, because then it's really like you're teaching the kid to guess what you want rather than learning to make a choice and living with it. And we're going to focus today on 2 different types of choices. There's across-task activities and within-task activities. Now, normally, this is the list that people often do not start with. So I want to start here, because this might be something you grow to. This is going to be different kids doing different things at the same time. So imagine walking into your classroom or somebody's classroom, and somebody might be working on a paper, somebody might be building like a diorama, somebody might be building a YouTube video. So people are doing different things at different times. It could be as simple as, what would you like to do first? There's actually wonderful studies done. There was a study done by Lee Kern, and it was going back to the context you were just talking about, it was a self-contained class for kids with emotional and behavior disorders. They had a list of 10 things they had to do. The entire intervention was just, which one do you want to do first? And that one choice of getting to choose was enough to increase kids' engagement and minimize disruption. It might be pick a learning center. So rather than clipping kids down to highlight where they're not doing well, instead, let's take those clips and let's do a drawing where it might be I draw out 5 kids' names and I say, you go clip onto whatever center you want to start at first. And then I might draw another 5 kids' names and say, use your clip to clip on the center you pick. So I'm choosing how to move through my day. It might be, build a schedule for yourself. And I saw a couple people had this open, that tic-tac-toe board for choice. So you're controlling the choices. The other type of choice is where it's the within activity choice. So everybody's doing the same thing, but with a little variation. So for very young kids, like if you work with the little ankle biters, it could be as like, do you want to use crayons or do you want to use sparkly markers? It can be that simple. Do you want to do this at your desk or the library? Now you can't have that as a choice if the kid really can't go to the library or you're just ditching the kid because you want them to go to the library. But it might be, you want to do this at your reading corner in our classroom, do you want to do it at your desk? Would you like to work independently or would you like to work with a partner? And then you're going to control those parameters. Which book would you like to read? That's going to be something that's going to take a longer conversation. That's not a very fast choice because that's a bigger investment, especially if it's a chapter book. We can also offer kids choices of, would you like to finish this now or would you like to save this for homework? And there's nothing on this list that you're going to look at that you're going to say, man, I don't want to offer that choice. If you don't want to offer it, then what do? You don't offer it. You're going to start by making your menu because you're the instructional leader for the classroom, or the person that you're working with is. So you're going to start by working together to make that list. I used to work with a lady when I taught general ed for a while, and she was a kindergarten teacher, and she was dressed to the nines. She was absolutely like super put together. And then there's me. Right here. Looks like this all the time, just rough. But she's like, oh, I just hate it when the kids pick painting. Like, I just don't like painting because it gets on my clothes. And I'm like, then don't offer as a choice. And she's like, what? We can do that? I'm like, yeah, girl, you're in charge. you drove to school. So I like instructional choices for a number of reasons. Some reasons are the efficiency. This is simple. This is an easy strategy, and one of the things I love is that it builds towards kids' intrinsic motivation. You are putting the kid in charge, and I'm a big believer in self-determined work. Carrie Shokran and Mike Waymeyer from University of Kansas do fabulous work on self-determined behaviors. And oftentimes, we've done studies, we've published studies together that have shown, and I've done these with Eric Carter from Vanderbilt, we have done studies to show that the general ed and special ed teachers all prioritize self-determined behaviors. Like if you ask them how important is it for kids to make choices, people say that is very important, but it's rarely built into instruction. Because people often feel like they're going to lose control if people are doing different things at different times. So that's why we might start with within and then go to across. But by doing that, you're giving kids an opportunity to practice making a choice and then living with the choice that they made. Yes. Oh yeah, you love that. High five. Okay. So yeah, if I choose to not use this 10-minute block to finish these problems now, and I choose the option of doing homework, I might later think that was not a good choice because now I am back late from soccer practice and I've now got to do this thing. Or I didn't do it and now I got to go back to school and say I didn't do it. So next time I might make a different choice. I saw a lot of you all in the bar last night and you were drinking what looked to be a delicious chocolate martini. Anybody want to raise their hand on this video? Yeah, solid girl. Yeah, so thank you. That looked absolutely delicious, and I was super tempted, but I knew I had to get up and give a keynote. Did I wrestle with that decision? I did. Did I regret it? Yeah, I might be drinking one at 10 o'clock this morning, but I'm hoping there won't be any shame. So in choices, we want to give kids the opportunity to practice making those, and this has been tested in a number of ways. David Royer, who's at University of Hawaii, we feel sad for him, former student, he did this wonderful systematic review that looked at the places where instructional choices have been tried and how it went well and where it didn't go well. On our website, you can see just like a one-page resource guide that you might check out. You might also go pull his systematic review. Some of the benefits, as we've talked about, is that this is super simple, it's easy to implement, and it supports your instructional content. And after you've gone through the idea of making the menus of choices that you're comfortable with, I can weave those in like to my starter activity. So it might be like in math, I could have 3 or 5 problems on the board, and I can say pick any 3 that you want to start with. Or I might have 2 journal prompts for a social studies class, and I say pick 1 to start with. Or it might be, I'd like you to respond to this prompt and write an illustration. I'm going to set a timer. I'm going to ask you to either start with the picture or the words, but we're switching in 3 minutes. So you can control what that's going to look like, but it does teach kids and provides them an opportunity to see how their choices go. You do have to think through, though, preparing independent opportunities. And we'll talk about some of the challenges of doing that. And it's important to think through how you're going to get that stuff in. And sometimes in the past, like myself as a teacher and when I'm supporting others, sometimes I didn't think through all the details. Like when I would give kids a choice of a culminating product. So it might be like, you know, remember the solar system assignment or something? So you want to think carefully on what you let people do and think about the logistics. So rather than having, like if you are a middle school or high school teacher and you teach the same period for 6 periods, rather than having 6 periods of solar systems coming in and all of a sudden like your room is busting at the seams with, you know, global representations, you might do it something like, you know, pick your own due date. They're going to be due this week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. You sign up. And then each of your class, you could have 5 students pick a due date. They come in, they bring it, they present on that date, and then they take that home. Your classroom is like not a locker room at that point. Kids that need the extra time, they might watch what I would refer to as the early adopters of turn-in assignments. They can get some ideas, wrap it up, and then you can even flow your grading that way too, so that you're not, like if you're an English teacher, like if you could do the same thing with turning in written assignments, you're not bogging yourself down. It'd be a lot easier to grade 5 things from each class than to do 200 at one time. So thinking through some of those logistics, let's walk through this. And some of you I see you have, if you've downloaded that implementation checklist for success, you will find these are the exact same words. And I respectfully suggest don't change the words, because if you do like your own tweak it variation, what people will spend time doing, and I've watched this happen, is that they'll have an article, a PowerPoint, and the words on person's mouths not lining up, and they're trying to figure out, is this number 1? Is this number 7? Was this your number 3 or number 4? Let's not do that. Let's just follow the steps today. So the first thing is you have to think about providing your own menu of choices. And so as an instructional leader, for each content area that you teach, think about where would you want to build in choice. Would it be with starter activities, closing activities? Is it independent assignment pieces? Once that menu has been made, you might put that literally wherever you do your planning. So if you have an electronic plan book, I would have an electronic copy of my menu of choices. I had the honor to teach, in addition to special ed, I also got to teach general ed science. And so I could just keep a list, like when I was doing my science lesson planning, or here are some ideas. And I'd learn new options, and some of it could be free choice, but you're going to make sure that kids are clear on your objective. Now, one thing is, this is important, once you've built in the choice, we have to honor that. It would not be a good idea to put the list of choices and say, all right, you know what, we don't even have time for choices today, everybody do number 5. Because then you've just communicated to them that choice is not really important. So if you're going to build it in, stick with it. And I like to weave it through instruction. Start with the choice to build momentum. When it comes to independent practice, like if they can truly, like going back to math, if they can show you in 10 problems that they know how to do it, do they really need to do 20? You'll have to decide how much positive practice they need. And then we have to ask the students to make their choices, so actually pick. And this is harder than it sounds, because for some kids, they agonize over the choice. So you've heard about my 2 kids, Nathan and Katie. So every time we move to a different location for a job for me, we gave them a little startup package, which was like a little bit of money so that they could go set up for success in their new school context. To this day, my 19-year-old daughter, I know I can drop her anywhere in the world as long as there's a Target and she'll be fine. So we used to go get her startup. She would take her money from her startup package and they could use it to buy something for their room, or at that time pay for long distance phone calls to friends. It could be whatever. And frankly, we would have given them the same stuff for setup, but this way they got to choose. So I remember one move we made. Katie goes in, she gets her $100, she goes through, she decides to do her room in hot pink, turquoise, and dramatic purple. So she goes, she buys a bedspread, a floor mat, all this stuff. Like in 20 minutes, she's like locked and loaded, she's got the cart, and then there's Nathan. We're standing in the Bakugan aisle. Do you know what Bakugans are? Those little like things that they pop open, it's like a game. Love of God. I look at the aisle and I know I'm in trouble. Like there's like this whole thing, and he's like, Mom, I need some help here. I just want to choose the best Bakugan. I'm like, Nathan, whichever one you choose is going to be the best because you're going to make that choice, you're going to love it. He's like, well, let's just think about it for a second. I'm like, okay, what are your favorite colors? So he's like, red, blue, yellow, whatever. So I'm like, get them down, I put them on the floor. So now I'm going into forced choice format. So I've got like 4 Bakugans on the floor. He's like, I don't know, I just don't want to get it wrong. And I'm like, Nathan, there is no wrong choice here. It's a toy. Just pick one. And at this point, Katie's like, TikTok, we got to go set up our new bedding. And so finally we go down to 2 choices. And he's like, okay, I just can't do it. I just can't do it today. So and he's like, so then he starts hiding the Bakugan in locations around the store so that if he changes his mind later, we can make another trip back. And I'm sorry to whoever restocks in Target, get that on videotape too. 2 same kids. Their high school math teacher asked me in the nicest possible way if they had the same father. Because they, yeah, and I'm not even kidding. She's like, so I know Nathan, and he's kind of all up here, and then there's Katie. So she's like, I know you're the mom. I'm like, yep, same mom, same dad. Whole thing, raised in the same home, never any time apart. They all come different. So when we say make a choice, we're going to have to teach some kids how to do that. And so, can I borrow this? Thank you. So it might be like the whole world out there is going to say, we have 2 options today. You can do this or you can do this. And many kids are going to be just fine at picking it out. And let's say Laura needs some support. So I might, as a tier 2 support for here, just put this right here. So I'll catch you back in just a second. I'm going to grab the one you don't want. And then I'm going around and I'm going to check to make sure that people have made their choice. And then I go back to Laura and say, which one can I take away for you? Okay, thanks. And then I move away. I'm not staying here to engage her, like, let's talk about the choice. Why did we not pick that one? So I'm going to ask them to make them, and I'm going to give them just enough wait time. Some decisions are going to be bigger than others. If you're asking a kid to pick a book for a semester-long project, that forced choice thing is not a good idea because that's too much pressure. I remember poor Nathan cracked under the pressure one year. He took some class when we first moved to, I think it was in Kansas, and he's like, Mom, he's like, I panicked, I didn't even think about it. I picked a book. I'm like, well, what's the book you picked? And he's like, well, it's just going to take forever to read. I didn't want to tell you. And I'm like, you know what, Nathan, I'm going to commit to you. I'm going to read it along with you. We'll put together a reading schedule. We'll do it. We can talk about it. We used to share an office together. So my desk was here. It was over here. There was a mirror so I could see what was on his screen to make sure it was all things that it should be. So I go to this whole thing, and then he comes back with this spreadsheet, and he's Mr. Math. So he had broken it down. So like on non-band days, we're going to do a 1.5 reading block on the weekends. We're going to do a 1.0 non-band days, 0.5. And he had this whole system. I'm like, what book did you pick? He picked Moby Dick. Do you know how long that book is? I won't give the ending away if you haven't done it. No, he needed more wait time than he probably was allowed to have in that context, and you can see why, because it was a struggle for him. But for our kids, once they are given the choice and you're given enough coaching and prompting, then we are going to ask them to make their choice. And now here's the key. You have to give them the choice that they made. And the kid if you've told the whole class that they can either work with a partner or work with individually, and if I pick my new best friend over here and you know that I'm going to talk the whole time with her, do you still have to give me that choice? True story. That's right. You have to give that same choice, because it's not like, no, you don't get a choice. There's a hot mess waiting to happen. You can't do that. And then they're going to observe the natural consequences of the choice they made. So you ask them to make the choice, and when a lot of time, and then this is good prompting for us all to remember, please do not say, oh, I knew you'd make that choice. Oh, yeah, I thought that was, you made the right choice for yourself. As soon as you say something that's evaluative like that, then they're only going to be spending the time to try to figure out, did I pick the right thing? Is it the wrong thing? So let them make the choice. And so your response would be, I really appreciate you letting me know which one you picked. Move away. Is it the right one? Is it the right Bakugan? We're not doing that. Just pick it and then see how that goes for them. So those are your steps, the final one being getting feedback from the kids. And some kids will tell you, I need more time on choices, or I'd like to see more choices. And they might actually encourage you to expand your list. In my job as a teacher, when I was a classroom teacher, I used to do at the end of every week points of feedback. It was informal sociability from the kids, where I would say, which choices were your favorite ones to pick? Do you have a new idea for me to add for kids for next year? And I would just write it on an index card, and I would drop it into, back in the day, the hanging files, so that I could come back to that next year. But I was showing them how their feedback shaped my instruction. And then the next year's kids, I would say, this idea came from Jermaine. Last year he suggested da-da-da-da, and this is what we're going to try out. Does that make sense? Because you're helping them to understand that what they do matters. And as you do this, I think this would be a really, after behavior-specific praise, this is a place I would start to support general ed and special ed teachers. Because I got to tell you, by the time a lot of kids get to high school, you will hear them say things like, this place feels like a prison. And when you hear them say that, that is a clear indication they don't have enough autonomy, they don't have enough choice. We're never going to get good at making good decisions if we don't get the opportunity to practice. And where better to start than our classrooms? So some of the resources that you have there in front of you will be you have the PowerPoint that's there, you'll have this little checklist for success to help you get started. And then there's little supports to make sure that once you've put this in place, we want to make sure that it doesn't fall off your radar. We've learned through the science of instruction that self-monitoring works, like keeping track of things works. Do you know that your behavior changes just by virtue of monitoring it? How many of you have ever started a diet? Yeah. I'm not going to ask how it went, but when we start a diet, we normally make all these things, and like for me, it might be like back in the day, it was like have a piece of toast, have half a grapefruit, have 2 Oreos at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, have the rest of the bag of Oreos, whatever. So if I'm going to commit to doing this, I'm going to use this Fidelity Checklist to keep track of those pieces, but it also becomes a discriminative stimulus to prompt you to remember these steps, because otherwise things start to fall by the wayside. So if you look at that Fidelity sheet, I might be doing this class-wide. I might be doing it class-wide, but only collecting data on the 2 or 3 kids in my class that screen in the yellow to see how this support works for them in terms of engagement. And before you start, remember, get people's input. If you were to ask both my kids about choices, both my kids would tell you they want the choices. One of my kids would say it's harder for them than the other. And so I'm not saying we don't do it. I actually think we do it more. If we know we've got kids that are struggling, it's like kids in a restaurant that are losing control. That means they need more time rather than less time. Does that make sense? So what we're going to do now is looking at these resources. I want you to think about this as a tier 2 support. Now, we listed during the keynote that big idea of a big giant list of tier 2 supports. This is one way you can organize your tier 2 supports. This is the name of the support, like we're talking about instructional choice, and when we're thinking about it as a tier 2 support, this is called an intervention grid, and you can download these directly. There's a blank form, you can cut and paste some in, you can build your own. You write a description of what it is so that you can explain to a parent, like they might think, oh my gosh, I don't want my kid having the choice to work or not work. You can refine what that means, explain the type of choices. And then when we're thinking about doing it more intentionally for kids that have tier 2 or tier 3 needs, this is inclusion criteria. If our goal is to close gaps in performance for different types of kids, we must close gaps in access. So when we start connecting kids to tier 2 and tier 3 supports, it cannot be a crapshoot as to who gets what. We need to actually look 3 times a year to see for whom might this intervention be a good idea. So you might decide, like let's say you're using the SRSS-IE. You might say, I want to do the support for kids with externalizing or internalizing risk scores in the moderate range, and then you decide. And those kids who have an indication of academic challenge from one of these 2 things. Or it might be, I want to do it for kids with behavioral challenges or academic challenges. Does that make sense? Because that way you are literally considering every single kid to say, could this be an extra support for you? And if your data, like in your classroom, if it looks like more than 20% of the kids need tier 2 or tier 3, I would do that for every single kid. I would do that for a while, and then at the winter benchmark, I'd look to see how it's going, and then I might do it more intentionally for others. Then, for anything that you do that is not for everybody, whether it's enrichment or remediation, 3 things. We need to make sure that you're keeping track on, does this work for them? So by giving them choices, are they turning more of their assignments in? Is the accuracy better? Are they coming to school more often? So you decide what that makes sense, and then keep track of, is it happening? And before you start, get both perspectives from the teacher and from the kid. And I'm going to tell you, some people are very uncomfortable giving choices because they're worried about losing control. Is there any way to stop that ringing? Go back the other way? Okay. It's not just in my ears, right? So, as we're looking at it, we want to make sure that we're getting all this information, how it's going for them, if it's being implemented, and how to make sure that it's comfortable for them. And then you have to have a plan for when you're going to fade this. So that I might not have to give that same rate of reinforcement anymore. I would never take out instructional choices from my class, but I may stop monitoring that kid to see how they're responding. So like once this kid starts getting like to 80% criteria for several days, maybe like for 2 weeks' time, I conclude this as a tier 2 support, but it's still a practice in my instruction. Do you see the distinction? Okay, so I'm not shifting teacher practice, but I'll stop engaging in that. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take this 5-minute block of time, and the next 2 we will not be going through in such detail. We're going to go in a more clipped pace, but I'd like you right now, if you would, if you're somebody that works with students directly, will you jot down some ideas that you can take back for next week to think about what choices could you build in? What would you feel comfortable with? And if you are somebody who's doing PD, how would you feel about using this for your own PD? So let's talk about that, PD being professional development. Great clarifying questions. So as you're thinking about doing instructional choice, we would do it for everybody in our class. If you are in a role where you can support other people in learning new strategies, you might put this into faculty meetings, you might do it as a book study, you might do it at a district PD day. Look for your direction from your district leaders as well. And then yes, when it comes time for that tier 2 grid to think about for whom it might be a good idea, those things in the grids would be done for students who are screening in the yellow that might need that behavioral support. I will say there are times when people are new to a grade level, new to a building, or brand new to teaching, and they do not know what to do to support engagement. And then you tell those same people that, hey, you've got a 90-minute block of English and language arts, or hey, good news at the high school, you've got block scheduling, you've got these kids for 2 back-to-back periods. For some people, that is terrifying. So the way I go in to help people to do this is to say, let me give you a tool to support your instruction, because that's what they're looking for. They think of behavior as something separate, but we're going to weave it in. The next strategy I want to talk to you about is increasing kids' opportunities to respond. And this is another really rich and wonderful, simple strategy that I can do at tier 1. This will require a little bit more prep than what we've talked about, as far as it's more than just building a menu of choice. When we think about opportunities to respond, rather than doing the things like Ferris Bueller's Day Off, anyone, nobody responds, so the teacher then answers. Or there's the other one where people will ask a question and they'll say, Kathleen, what do you, and then as soon as you say my name, every other kid's like, whew, damn, dodge that bullet. That one's not for me. Or there used to be the time to make sure that every kid gets a question, that it would go down the rows. And then the kids are in the back like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I don't have to pay attention to the person in front of me. And then some people got a little better and they did things like ask the question and then put a person's name at the end. So at least it keeps people supposedly listening for a little while. For increasing opportunities to respond, we're going to approach this in a little bit more of a structured way. And so we want to ideally use this as a rapid fire set of questions that you're prepared to ask and answer. And I can do this in a number of ways. It could be like choral responding, like if in this room I could do quick checks for understanding with like 4 or 5 things. and then I might ask everybody to respond out loud. I might say, here's a question, I want you to think, pair, share, like with your shoulder partner, the person at your table. So I could do those responses. In larger classes, or just for a quick check, I might say, give me a thumbs up if the answer is yes, a thumbs down if it's a no, or a sideways if you're undecided. I might do a response card, and there's great research on these now where you give kids cards, like yellow, green, and red. Same thing, red, I don't know. Yellow, means I'm somewhere in the middle, blah, blah, blah. I could have A, B, C, D cards that kids hold up. I could do individual whiteboards. Schools with the resources can use click-ins for technology. I can use any number of systems like clickers. The point being is we're going to pick a modality on how they're going to give you the answers, and you need to think about what your modality is for doing this. And this cannot be like the whole day. You're thinking about increased OTRs, opportunities to respond, for a short period of time, like take 10 minutes, 15 minutes, because you need to have this be fast enough pace that you can rapid fire at least 3 questions per minute minimum. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but it is a lot. So you might want to think about in your own instruction or supporting people for instruction, pick like a time of day to start with how this would work. And I'm just going to tell you a story, and I might get some of the details wrong. But we worked with this wonderful teacher in Ohio, and she wanted to try out this strategy. So she picked math as a place to do it. And so what she did is she prepared a whole series of index cards, 4x6 index cards, where she had questions written out with A, B, C, or D. And she was an elementary teacher. And all the kids had cards that said A, B, C, D. And she had an Elmo in her classroom. So you put the card here, and then it projects. Good with me so far? So, and she explained to the kids, this is a way for me to check to see how you're doing. And she told them about the strategy, and she did ask every kid to actually fill out the sociability so she could get her class's perspective, because it was the first time she tried it, thought it was a good idea. So the way she did it was like this. She would say, here's the first question, this one's for everyone. So it's their prompt that everybody's going to hold up their card. And so she would read the question, and she would read A, B, C, and D, so that the kids who were struggling with reading are not blocked from accessing that prompt. And then she would say, hold up your cards. In the beginning, she had them hold their cards up high, but the feedback she got from her kids was that was embarrassing, so she called them tummy cards. These were younger kids, primary age kids. So she would have them hold up their card, and then she did a quick scan and gave them the feedback, and it looks like most everyone got that right. And then she'd put that in a correct pile. And then she'd say, this is another one for everybody. She'd read the question, she'd read the responses, and then she would count down. And what is that? Wait time. And then she'd say, hold up your cards. And then she would do the scan. And if it wasn't quite right, like most people didn't get it, she'd put it into another pile. So she's quickly checking, rather than grading all those papers, she's like, this is what they've got, and this is what they're working on. And then it would be interspersed, this question is for one friend. And she would read it and the answers, and then she'd say, Olivia, hold up your card right here. Because you can intersperse individual and choral responding to increase engagement. And what she did in her particular classroom is she got parent permission to collect data for 2 kids that had scored higher on internalizing issues, to see was that enough to draw them in to participate more and get the feedback. And so I thought she had a really nice approach of how to do it. It's very efficient, it's time determined. Some of the sociability comments that came back from her kids is some kids felt stressed by it because you get 5 seconds to make a decision. But the vast majority of the kids were like, this is fantastic. And then she had data for 2 kids that had screened in, and for 1 kid, that's what was needed, and the other kid, it wasn't enough, so they went to a more intensive Tier 2 support. So as you're thinking about doing this, the idea is to build automaticity, like so that you are going to know the answers. And her questions were all math related, and she was doing it for math terminology. I could do the same thing for characters in a story. I could do it for elements if I'm a science teacher, teaching different elements. When I was a teacher, I remember teaching Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry, one of my favorite books to read, and every kid had like a kind of a popsicle stick, and they found a picture of a character from the book, and then they had character sticks that they would hold up. So then my questions were, what's the name of the character that was walking very carefully on his way to the bus so as not to get his new shoes dirty. And then those kids would hold up their stick that said like little man, and then there was a picture of him. So it's quick checks for understanding. As we're thinking about doing this has been tried and tested in a number of different settings. It has worked with from very young kids through high school. Again, you can dip a toe back into the resources that are on the website. The nice part about this is super efficient, it's very engaging, and it's a way to pull all kids in. Our goal is to maximize engagement. And we really want to make sure that kids are in upwards of engagement close to 80%. Like 75 is like pretty much the national norms. But if we're offering this much instruction in a school, and kids are engaged this much, they're missing this opportunity. So we want to push the amount of time that they're accessing our good instruction. And so we can set that as a target to be hitting between 75 and 80% engagement. And then the teachers can, they can adjust the pacing. The feedback from teachers when they've tried that is that initially it's harder than they thought. Because if you want to do 10 minutes and you need to have at least 3 questions per minute, how many questions is that? You have to have 30 pre-prepped questions. But if you even just start 1 year doing and you can go up higher. You can have some things, depending on the nature of the response, like flashcards for math facts or things, you can go much faster than that. But generally people say if they're trying to increase it to like 5 per minute, it becomes more challenging. But once built, if you're teaching the same content again, it's often helpful. So the steps for moving forward would be to identify the content that you want to focus in, and you want to make sure it's linked to the instructional objectives, so it's not some random thing you're doing on the side. It's to meet your standard that you're focusing on. And then you have to prepare your list of questions that you're going to ask, and then just like Mallory worked through, like she was going to use her Elmo and do it that way, it might be you decide you're going to do like a relay race with your kids if your classroom is set up in rows. It might be that your method of responding is that they can make or erase 1 mark on your whiteboard. So it might be you have 5 rows of kids and the exact same 5 like long division program problems up here, and all of them are exactly the same, and then the instruction to the kids is you can make or erase 1 mark. So that first kid would run up and maybe cross something out, the next kid would carry the 1, the next kid would subtract, and if somebody made a mistake, that person would erase it. But the idea is all eyes on me. All eyes on me. Okay, then you have to think about your modality. What makes sense for how you're going to deliver the questions? How are they going to respond back? When we do professional learnings on site, like at our university and in different training locations, on every single table like this, everybody has a response card, yellow, green, and red, so that there might be 200 people in the room, but we can ask and answer questions really quickly. On every circle table, we have 3 cups, yellow, green, and red. And so I will give an instruction, and I'll say, okay, arrange your cups. And I'd say put a green on top if you're clear, you know how to move forward as a team. Put a yellow on top if you need a little instruction, but you can still move forward. Put a red on top if you're totally stuck. And if I look out and it's a sea of red, whose issue is that? That's me. That means I need to reteach that really fast. Now, hot tip though, if you look out and it's mostly green and a little bit of yellow, the first thing to do is not to run to the cup on red. The first thing is to teach every adult or child in your classroom that the best way to get my attention is for your success. So verbally, I'm going to acknowledge 3 teams on green. Looks like so-and-so's got it, so-and-so's got it. All right, if you're on green, help out somebody on yellow, and then I hit the kid that has the red cup. I'm still there really fast, but I'm teaching that child that the best way to get my attention is for your success. Because otherwise, if they want your attention, if they're motivated by your attention, that cup's going to be red all the time if they know that's the fastest way to get you. So we want to be responsive, but not reinforcing the wrong behavior. So as you're thinking about how they respond, think about what makes the sense logistically. Like, I can't get to any of you guys in the middle in your rows right now. So I need to do a different modality that wouldn't, is going to not allow me to get as close to you as I'd like to be. Not in a creepy way. Okay. Then I want to explain how that format works to the kids. Like, you have to teach them how to use their cards, and that feedback from kids is really, really important. Like, listen to them when they say this is embarrassing, but they decided on the tummy cards. And then we want to make sure here, as we've said several times, make sure that it's at least 3 opportunities to respond. in some format, either in unison or with the cards. And then that quick little idea about giving feedback, like say, yep, looks like most of us got it, that's not quite right. This is not the time to launch into reteaching. But those two stacks of responses, that's where you're going to learn what you need to reteach. It's this stuff over here where the answers were incorrect. And then finally, let them give feedback. One thing that this teacher did, Mallory, that I was telling you about, she did this beautiful thing where at the end of the first trial of using it, she did it over one semester. She got feedback from kids at the end of every unit where she used it, and then she shaped her procedures the next time. So it was a wonderful opportunity to show kids that their thoughts and opinions matter as well, which also feeds back to building autonomy and building that intrinsic motivation and building the idea of self-determined behavior. And I know you've had some time now to look through some of those resources, and you've seen these, again, different ways you can monitor the extent to which you're using that as a regular basis. You may decide you're going to do that 3 days a week. You may decide that's going to be a quick way to do independent practice in a classroom, to do a quick check rather than like another worksheet type thing. And then for this last strategy that I want to show you as we move off of this, is that each one of these can become a grid in your Tier 2 or Tier 3 support. So that's an example of what OTRs might look like in an elementary school. You see how this is a lot longer of an explanation? This needs to be detailed enough so that somebody could read that, a teacher, a child, a parent, an administrator, a parapro, and know who is doing what to whom and under what conditions. It needs to be enough so that somebody gets the gist of what the learning opportunity would be. And I'm going to do the same thing in middle and high schools. Enough clarity so that people can see it's not, I'm going to take you to the corner and do flashcards with you because you don't get it. It's going to be more of an inclusive approach to providing that instruction. Now, what we're going to do in this next block is I'm going to have you independently spend about 5 to 7 minutes checking out this next resource by yourself or with a partner. You can choose. What strategy are we using? Instructional choice. Good. So we're going to look at this strategy of pre-correction, and I'm going to give you just a 2-minute overview of what this strategy is and why it's effective. As we're thinking about all the good work that we're doing and all the systems that you're building, you have expectations at Tier 1, you ideally are leaning towards bringing in your social and emotional learning. So much of what we're doing right now in our life is antecedent-based interventions. We in the 70s were largely trained in how to respond when things went wrong with behavior. And we were taught things like write a kid's name on the board. If they screw up again, what do? You check them. And if you screw up again, what do? Check them again. And if they screw up a third time, what do? Check them again, and then they go to the office. And then you look at the clock and you realize it's 8:35. Okay, I have just bounced this child. They're getting no instruction the rest of the day. I'm happy to say antecedent-based interventions, like what we're talking about here, are all shifts that we make on the front side to set the stage for the desired behavior to occur. So things like before we send kids out to go out into the hallway to go to the next class, before we send kids out for arrival or dismissal, before they get on a bus, we remind them of what we're looking for. We are setting them up for success. My daughter is really good about supporting me. When she lived at home, like before I would travel, she would say things like, she used to be a coupon cutter out. I really miss her being at home. Obviously, I'm talking about 900 times, but she used to go get protein bars for me and travelable snacks. She would have them in little Ziploc baggies, and she'd be like, here's your AM snack, here's your PM snack. She's a really good food coach. And I was pretty compliant until the baggies ran out. And I looked at all the stuff that she did. It's all things setting up for success. It's teaching expectations before there's a problem. So I'm going to use also opportunities in instruction to say, this is going to be a great time to practice some of our empathy. Because when we're talking today about this, we're having this courageous conversation on the equity, which is like some districts' one of board goals is, excellence, equity, and engagement. I think I was talking to you guys about that earlier. You pre-correct the kids to say, we're about to launch into a very courageous conversation, and some of these topics are not going to feel comfortable. And I want to make sure that everybody's being respectful to those not present, and that people are really listening to people's ideas rather than just advocating for their own. You're telling them ahead of time. I love this because you're setting them up for success. And this is a great way to make sure that we're not just waiting for kids to screw up. I get so many questions, and I'm sure you do too, of I don't know what to acknowledge. How do I reinforce a kid? What am I supposed to give them a ticket for? It's this stuff. It's the use of social skills. It's the use of your meeting expectations. So you're giving them the feedback and doing that. Pre-correction goes so perfectly with this. Tell them what you're looking for, teach it to them, give them opportunities to practice, and then you reinforce them for doing it. And when you're doing this, it can be in any different situation. So I'm going to ask if you are able to download the PowerPoint part of this right now. And I'd like you to spend just 5 quick minutes on this. And if you do not have access to anything electronically, could you make a friend and sit by somebody? I just want to make sure that you can find this. And in particular, I want you just to click through this to see, would you feel comfortable talking through some of these finer points? Would you feel comfortable helping people to figure out, where do I want to intervene? What are the expectations? How can I adjust it on the front side? Think about these steps and how comfortable you would be. And then if you're not, what supports would you need to get there? So let's go ahead and jump in, and we're going to come back in 5 minutes to wrap up. All right, thank you so much. I really appreciate everybody's engagement, no pun intended. What's been nice is to hear some of your conversations where people are saying things like, I'm aware of these, I do these, but I want to refine these or help other people doing it. Some people are looking at the implementation checklist to say, like, here's what I could use to help somebody get started. Some of you are already doing these things and are happy to have the treatment fidelity checklist so you can see how it's working for different kids. As you're on this website, start to think now about how could you use this information to scale it up beyond your own classroom or your own school context. As I mentioned at the very beginning, some people will actually map this out over an entire course of a year. So they might start in the launch of the school year and just focus on behavior-specific praise and reteach people things like, we're going to reinforce effort, not ability. So like when my own students and my own children have a success, I won't ever say like, you're so smart. What I praise is the things that, exactly, it's the effort. It's things that are malleable. So my daughter is like hitting incredible weights right now. She's now a trainer for CrossFit, and she's a trainer at USAW, so it's a USA weightlifting, Olympic weightlifting, and that's her jam. What I praise is her diligence. I admire her commitment to keeping her body and her mind healthy, her time in the gym. Those behaviors lead to the desired outcome. But if you praise a kid by saying, man, you are the smartest 5th grader I've ever worked with, well, if I'm sitting right next to that kid, it's like, I'm out, I got nothing. I am not the smartest 5th grader that she's worked with. So we want to make sure that we are shaping behaviors that if kids engage in those, they're going to have those success. And I want to teach, even just if it's that much, like if you can do a 5-minute tip for success. Some of our schools actually, through the support of one of our really super, super strong doc students, Mark Buckman, like he actually works with our district trainers to email out a tip every week, like a shout out for a success, a coaching tip, and a reminder of an action item. You might think about doing a book study, and some of you were just asking like, where's the book with the strategies? It's this one over here, and I apologize, I have a tremor, so that's what the bouncing ball is. So that's supporting behavior for school success. That's the one that has a strategy for each. This is what I was presenting on a couple years ago where the lady said, hey, that's great, but we don't know how. So this one's more general. But whether it's this book or something else, reach out, go online, go find out what could be exciting things and build those into your ongoing professional learning. And not everybody's going to want to do a book study. So we need something that's going to get to everybody. So think about district mandated professional learning days, district mandated whatevers to dip a toe and then inspire people to want to do it, and connect back to your Tier 1 efforts. No new acknowledgement systems in any of these extra supports. Work with whatever the one acknowledgement system is, like so whatever your ticket is, or whatever that looks like at Tier 1, that should be the same reinforcement structure in all. And as you're thinking about this in a concrete way, you want to build a library of resources for yourself. So that I heard somebody say, we really need to work to empower the new people that we're hiring in our building to know how to teach in a way that maximizes engagement and minimizes disruption. Don't assume that people are coming knowing how to do that. They might, but everybody could benefit from positive practice. So as you're looking at the full scope of resources, we just encourage you to Do one small shift in instruction, one strategy at a time. Help people get good at it. Help people feel comfortable with your coaching and your support. And if you're somebody doing this with kids, then if you're comfortable with it, let them come watch. Because sometimes you might think you're doing a movement correctly and you're not quite on point. So I want to thank you for your time and thank you seriously for being so engaged, especially before lunch.